Welcome to Rent-A-Friend Radio, where we use logic and reason in every season to maintain compliance with wisdom and science. I am your friend at a very reasonable hourly rate, Rent-A-Friend 2000, the man with a plan to bring the facts on stacks of wax, showering the nation with science education. And today we are answering your listener mail. Today we're going to be looking at a video made by a guy called Viced Rhino, which I guess is kind of like Virtue Rhino, but more impolite? I don't know. So this rhino, who is a very well-dressed rhino, as you'll see, took one of my videos, a nice 4-minute video about evolution and the definition of evolution, and turned it into, heaven help us, an 18-minute response. But it's okay, because he's not a roach clown. When I saw this, I thought, okay, this will be insulting and stupid. But actually, he seems fairly polite. He tries to make a reasoned case for his position. He's not just ranting in swear words. I was pleasantly surprised. So, granted, while I'm about to explain why he's wrong about a bunch of things, I would suggest that if you want to see how the other half ought to argue, check him out, because it's a nice, refreshing change of pace from the usual swear word barrage and just plain stupid that I get in the comments on social media. All it took was a rhino and a bow tie. That being said, here's why he's wrong. We start off with a screen that says, "We're stealing your video, but it's okay." And then he's got these totally sweet titles that are on fire! Now, for the purpose of this discussion, let's review the evolutionary history of life on Earth according to Charles Chuck D. Darwin. So, the evolutionary story is what we call the Darwinian tree of life. You start off with something like a bacteria, and over time, you get every living thing on Earth. So bacteria became worms, that became fish, that became lizards, that became mammals, that became eventually us, and everything else. So let's take a look at one little branch of that, the fish branch. So, millions and millions of years ago, you had the ancient fish, and the descendants of the fish went a couple of different directions. Some of them continued to be fish. Some of them were modified and became lizards. Some of them were modified and went extinct and are now dead. Now ask yourself one thing. Do these 3 different branches involve the same kind of changes? Are they all evolution? Try to keep this picture in your head as the conversation continues. Anyway, here we go.
Biological evolution, simply put, is descent with modification.
Definition fail!
Really? I mean, it's a touch oversimplified, but it seems pretty good to me. I implore you, O Orange One,
A nice Trump reference.
to elaborate on why it failed.
This is put a little too simply.
Yeah, but as it is a website directed at helping people with little to no knowledge of anything about evolution...
So just to recap, his first comment was that this definition is oversimplified, and then when I criticize it for being oversimplified, he decides to argue with me. I'm just a little confused right off the bat. It's okay, let's keep going.
Tell them that definition and see if they understand it on the first go. Or see if maybe you'll have to explain what alleles are and...
I get it. People are too stupid to understand evolution, so we have to dumb it down until it's actually inaccurate. Is that politics or is that marketing? Everything that lives is descended from something of its own kind.
Species, not kind. Kind is too vague.
The word species is actually more vague than the word kind is. The word species actually has several different conflicting definitions depending on who you ask. Just a sort of a dog example, the Chihuahua. That's one variety of dog, but is it a species? It depends who you ask. Because it's a variety, but most people would say that all of the different hundreds of pet shop dogs are all one species of dog. But then you can take the Chihuahua and you can mate it with the Beagle, so some people would say, well, because they can interbreed, that's a species, and because you can't get the Chihuahua to breed with, say, a Mastiff, those are different species. But then the first group would disagree with the second group. So, there's conflicting definitions for what species means. And this is how some people claim we have 1,200 species of fruit fly. I'm not buying that for a second. Also, it just sounds kind of gross. This weak sauce definition means that you, being descended from your parents, but being not their clone, are an example of evolution.
Yes, I'm so glad you understand. That is exactly it.
This definition could be restated: biological evolution is any living thing giving rise to another living thing which is not its identical clone.
Yeah, it could.
No, that's what you just said. You just said because the variations between your genes and your parents are slight, that is evolution. Also, I refuse to say I evolved from my mother. That sounds weird.
Agreed, but my mother is way too weird for me to not want to be genetically different from her, so having evolved from her is preferable.
That sounds like a valid point, actually. Point Rhino. Yeah, I can't argue with that. Furthermore, they don't say what kind of modification. I think we'd all agree that a normal 4-legged dog giving birth to a 1-legged puppy named Little Brother would be descent with modification, but hardly a big evolutionary leap forward.
You're right, we wouldn't really count it as an evolutionary step forward. But yes, it would count as evolution.
But the mistake that he's making is thinking that you can consider it evolution when structures and functions and genes that already exist go away. But that's the exact opposite of what evolution has to do. We'll talk about that more in just a minute.
All evolution is descent with modification.
And this, my friends, is why that definition fails, because it allows this well-dressed rhino to say that dogs losing the legs that they already had, legs going away, is an example of evolution. Is it descent? Of course, there's a next generation. Is it modification? Yeah, because it's different. But it's things that were going away. That's just kooky dukes. Evolution is supposed to explain where things come from. It's the origin of species, not the going away of species, not the gradual falling apart and decomposing of species. It's supposed to explain where dogs came from in the first place. It's supposed to explain where legs came from. Having something that exists, going away, is not the same as the origin of those things. That's kind of the point of the entire video that I made. That's my complaint.
Dogs with 4 legs have a survival advantage over dogs with 1 leg. It doesn't mean that the dog with 1 leg didn't evolve the characteristic of only having 1 leg.
Did we hear that? The dog with 1 leg evolved the characteristic of having only 1 leg. So you start off with a population of dogs that, like normal dogs, have 4 legs, and one of them gives birth to a puppy with only 1 leg, and that's evolving. Now I realize that he's going to accuse me of thinking that things have to get better and stronger and faster. No. In order for evolution to be evolution, to explain the story wherein bacteria, over gradual time, become wolves and cabbages and moose and everything else, you have to add genes and structures and functions and behaviors that did not previously exist. That story cannot be told by taking away things that already exist. Take the bacteria. If you have a bacteria and you remove some genes, are you ever going to get a moose? No. If you take away structures and functions, will you ever get a pine tree? No. In order to tell the evolutionary story, the origin of species, you have to add genes and structures and functions. This definition allows you to say anything that ever happens to living things ever is evolution.
Keep in mind that we need to define the process so that bacteria can change over time into wolves and cabbages and everything in between. Little brother just ain't getting the job done.
There are plenty of species who didn't get the job done, so to speak. Do you know what happened to them? They went extinct.
He may be well-dressed, but the rhino just totally missed the point of the video. That was the summation point. The story has to explain how bacteria become wolves and cabbages and everything in between. The definition of evolution should explain how bacteria can become wolves and cabbages and everything else. Showing that some things don't survive doesn't tell the same story.
Once again, since they don't define change, how's that for a popular bait-and-switch, America? Then it can mean any change at all.
Yeah, any change between generations is a form of evolution. Any at all.
So, evolution is anything that ever happens to living things.
Well, not just anything, I mean...
Then it can mean any change at all.
Yeah, any change between generations is a form of evolution. Any at all. I mean, you keep saying this as if small changes don't count for some reason. What's the difference, I wonder, between small-scale and large-scale changes? Could it be that small-scale changes happen over small-scale time, and large-scale changes happen over large-scale time?
A perfectly valid question. Why is it I don't think small changes lead to big changes? Because of what kind of changes they are. Imagine you've got a deck of cards. So you've got a normal deck of 52 cards. Deal a hand. All right, you can get any of those 52 cards. Now shuffle them. Now deal it again. You might get 5 entirely different cards. Now shuffle it and deal it again. You can do this 2 million times and get a different 5-card hand every single time. But what you will never get doing this is the Archduke of Hearts. Do you know why? Because that card doesn't exist. Shuffling will never create the Archduke of Hearts. Okay, what if we do something else? What if we take the deck and say, let's throw out all of the black cards, all of the clubs and spades. Now will we have the Archduke of Hearts? No. We have just lost cards we had that will not create a new card. This is the point. There are lots of small-scale changes wherein things go away. Variations arise because of the shuffling of already existing genes. Shuffling them, or getting a different variation of them expressed phenotypically, or getting a different percentage of the population to express them phenotypically, doesn't create new genes. All of that is taking the genes that already exist and shuffling and dealing and seeing which hand wins. But the whole point of evolution is to create new species, new kinds. It is the origin of species. And if all you're doing is shuffling, or losing things you already had, that's not the big change of adding a new card to the deck. Adding the Archduke of Hearts would be a big step. You have to create an entirely new card that didn't exist. But throwing out the Queen of Hearts, that's a small-scale change that doesn't require the addition of any new information. It's just losing the information you already had. Shuffling and dealing and shuffling and dealing will never make new cards. That will never explain where any of those cards came from. You can shuffle and deal for 1,000 years and you will never explain where the Queen of Hearts came from, let alone will you ever create the Archduke of Hearts. That's the difference between small-scale changes and large-scale changes, is the difference between just shuffling or losing what you have now, which happens all the time in populations, or creating new genes for new structures and new functions which would lead to new species. Did that make sense? Everybody on the same page?
Yeah, this puts the term on par with other excellent pieces of scientific terminology, such as stuff, junk, things, and sorta. Good job, team. Let's stick those words in the glossary in the back of the book, and then we'll all break for a biscotti.
Just biscotti? I mean, wouldn't you usually have biscotti with coffee of some sort, or has my time in restaurants just warped my understanding of how snack foods work?
Yeah, well, of course we're getting coffee. I mean, you can't just have biscotti all by itself. And besides, when you leave the office, what do? You go get coffee that's better than the office coffee. The office coffee is just to keep you alive. When you leave the building, you go get coffee worth drinking. And when you've earned it, you get a biscotti. The coffee is implied.
I have a bucket of water that has been colored blue with food coloring. As I add individual drops of red food coloring to the bucket, I can watch the water gradually change color. After enough time and enough drops have been added, the water will be purple. Which drop changed it from blue to purple, I wonder? After every individual drop went into the bucket, the water was still the same color as it was before that drop went in, just a slightly different shade. So when did it transition from blue to purple?
The bucket of blue water analogy. Did you hear it? Did you hear it? Oh my gosh, it's brilliant. It's like he's figured it out and he doesn't even realize it. Here's how it works. You've got a bucket of water. It's water with blue dye in it. You've got blue water. It's water and blue dye. And the metaphor is when the blue water turns into purple water, that's evolution. One kind of thing evolves into another kind of thing. How does it work? Well, how do you get blue water to turn into purple water? Let's think about it, shall we? Do you stir it? If you take it and you just add some energy, you just shuffle up the water that's already there. Does that turn it purple? No. What about adding more water? No, it's already got water in it. What if you add more blue? No, it was already blue to start with. What if you take the blue out? Does that turn it purple? No. What do you have to do to turn the blue water into the purple water? You have to add red. Red wasn't already in the water. It was blue water, and you have to add the red to it. That's my entire point, my dear Rhino. You have to add something that wasn't already there. How do you get a fish to turn into a lizard? Do you shuffle existing fish genes? No! Do you add more fish parts, like maybe twice as many fins, or make bigger gills? No! They've already got those! They're fish! What if you just take fish parts off? What if you just take out the gills and take off the fins? No! You'll have a dead fish, which is delicious, but not evolution. What do you have to do to get a fish to turn into a lizard? You have to add structures and functions that didn't previously exist. To get a fish to turn into a lizard, you have to add lungs and legs, and specifically you have to add the genes that code for those lungs and legs. You have to add something that wasn't previously there. And so, if your analogy holds true, and I think it does, in order to get something to evolve in a Darwinian sense, there's only one kind of change that can be an evolutionary change, and that's where you add new genes which did not previously exist, which then result in new structures and functions and behaviors. Ta-da! He's kind of cracked the code. If only he could see it. If I may make a really weird metaphor, think about digestion. The process of digestion involves chewing your food, swallowing your food, and it goes through your stomach, and then your small intestine and your large intestine. While you're chewing, you might dribble some on your shirt. The dribbling of food onto your shirt is part of the digestion story. It's not part of the digestion process. You can't look at mustard on your tie and go, look, there's an example of digestion. But that's what it's like when you point to genetic entropy, extinctions, and vestigial organs and things like that and say, look, evolution. No, it's not. Then wipe your tie off. That stain's going to set in. You're gonna need to oxy-treat that. My dear friend the Viced Rhino says a lot of things in this video, but I'm going to end on this because I think it sort of sums up one of my points. And that's the evidence kept piling up.
I don't believe in evolution because it's what I want to believe in. I accepted evolution because the evidence just kept piling up.
The evidence for what? The evidence for evolution. But how does he define evolution? The way he defines evolution is that pretty much anything that ever happens to living things, any genetic change between any two generations,
then it can mean any change at all.
Yeah. Any change between generations is a form of evolution. Any at all.
Something going extinct, that's evolution. Or a dog being born that only has one leg instead of four, that's evolution. Or a population of fish that don't have eyes anymore when their grandparents did, that's evolution. Anything that ever happens, on his definition, is evolution. So if you define evolution so ambiguously that any change at all is evolution, even the difference between you and your own mother is evolution, then sure the evidence will pile up. But what you're not doing is defining evolution so that it explains the evolutionary process that would grow the Darwinian tree of life, which explains the origin of species. Essentially, what you have to do is ignore everything Charles Darwin said and was trying to prove, and just define it so ambiguously that it means anything. And that's the whole point of why I made that video that he's critiquing. That definition is so vague that it's useless. It's absolutely useless. And on his definition, I would be both a Young Earth Biblical Creationist and an evolutionist, and there would be no conflict or contradiction between the two because of how he defined it. And that's just kooky dukes. Well, my sincere thanks to the Viced Rhino for taking a look at one of my videos and trying to make a case for it. Now, of course, I think I've explained that I disagree with his case, but props to him for making a case. He didn't get personal, he didn't call me names, he didn't throw out profanity. He just tried to build a case the best he could, so props to him for that, and also props for that red bow tie. It's a nice look. You know, it's formal, but it's not too formal. I would recommend some shoes to go with it, though. I mean, his toenails, not working for me. But I like the bow tie. It's a good start, you know? You don't want to overdo these things. I'm I might try a bow tie myself. This is your Rent-A-Friend saying thanks for listening to Rent-A-Friend Radio. Don't wait for fate, there's no debate. I'm your friend at a very reasonable hourly rate. You dudes and dearies, send me your queries and I'll holler back Jack with answers and facts. I'll see you again. I hate this to end, but thanks for letting me be your Rent-A-Friend.